Welcome to the Just Chamia Show, and we're here with my homegirl, Lynette Gibson McElhaney. So according to an article in the Tico Times, which is an ex-US publication, Jesus Murillo, who is Mexico's Attorney General, told reporters that the 43 missing students who were abducted in late September by law officials in their Mexican town, and there's a supposed tie to drug cartels in Mexico. But these 43 students, missing students, were in fact killed, their bodies burned in a landfill, and their remains discarded in a nearby river. So that's inconsistent with a lot of the reports that we're seeing here in the United States, which is saying that the students are still missing, where in fact the Attorney General of Mexico has gone on the record saying that the students were killed, that they were burned and their remains discarded. And some of the remains have even been recovered, and they're trying to use DNA if possible to identify. What are your thoughts on the U.S.'s coverage on these missing 43? Our attempts to aid their families, or even bridging to the missing 200 plus schoolgirls in Nigeria, our coverage, our national outrage, and our sense of social responsibility when things like this happen.
I don't think we're ever, until we restore independence to the media, and we go back to the rules of media ownership that were in place. I think this shift happened under Bush. I needed to probably take a look at that in like '88. Until we get back to an independence of media, we won't hear the truth.
So Oakland has
for anything.
Right.
I mean, for anything. And again, I tell you, I don't think it's necessarily a two-party system. I think there's a corporate class and the rest of us, and that corporatocracy protects itself by spoon-feeding us the information and the titillation that keeps us distracted from asking any meaningful questions in the quest for justice and the quest for expanding democratic rights. So I don't think you get any truth when there is no independence in media, and when media is only bought and paid for as a commercial commodity, then it's nearly impossible to see a system where the journalists are going to be free to do free coverage, and where there's going to be the ability to be analytical about things that could wind themselves up to who's being paid, who benefits from this. Whether it's this failed war on drugs continues to be perpetuated, not because it's become a beast that feeds itself, right? You build more prisons, you have prison guard unions. Prison guard unions are going to stand up for the expansion of prison guards because it means more dues paying members and more protection for their members. They're not going to be for a system that decreases the number of prisons and therefore job security for their members. It's embedded in the system. When you privatize prisons, it becomes a profit center for people with stakeholders, right? With shareholders, When prisons were a burden to the state, they were cost centers that needed to be minimized. And so we were smarter about rehabilitation and education and things that would reduce the burden of crime as opposed to the profitability of it, right? So that to me is the same thing when you deal with these tragic human stories that are across the border. There's no profit in that for a profit-generating system of media coverage. That's why I believe it's so important that net neutrality rules be adopted, because
that we have the Just Chamia Show.
You have the Just Chamia Show, right. That the Just Chamia Show can get on the internet and be received, right? At the same speed level as broadband issue. This issue around net neutrality is so important. It's a terrible name, but look it up. It's important for us to protect this, and I'm so happy that the president has finally stepped out very strongly in favor of net neutrality, to treat the internet as a utility and not as a commercial enterprise. So, but anyways, I don't think you're going to hear the true stories around the Nigerian girls. You won't hear about black children who are missing. You're not going to have the same coverage of our war dead or any of that, because it doesn't sell soap or cars or whatever it is, or the truth of it may actually threaten the enterprise that controls the channel of information. So protecting public access, protecting our PBS stations, our public those public access, whether it's Pacifica Radio or the other nonprofits, we have to protect that narrow space. And I think we need to expand it in many ways. Good luck with getting us there. And we definitely, at a very minimum, have to protect the internet and the Twitterverse, because people on the ground in Ferguson were giving us the first-hand reports when the media was telling us it was under control, right? But for Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, the world would not have known
what was really happening
of the flash grenades, or the fact that the police in Ferguson targeted journalists and shot at them with rubber bullets. Yeah. Bona fide press with credentials, with press passes. Right. So and I think if there's a space where progressives need to really work on right now, the focus really should be on liberating the press, which right now is bound.
So lastly, on the story of the 43, and thinking of here in California, here in the Bay Area, here in Oakland and Richmond, we have very large Latino populations, very large Mexican populations. Have you heard, as living in Oakland, serving in Oakland, have you heard rumblings from your constituents around what's happening in Mexico about the impact of the drug cartels and their
government can get involved? But I have heard people talking about these these stories, and I've heard it from the place of the record deportations that have been enacted under the Obama administration, and I've known it from clients of mine who've had the adults have been deported and have had to move into really dangerous villages. Having lived in the United States undocumented for 20, 30 years, having children and having purchased property, to then be incarcerated and deported and then landed in really dangerous villages where the cartels rule. And again, it goes back to me to this failed war on drugs policy that has really made us less safe, and not only us, but the consumption demands of Americans for drugs and for narcotics has just incentivized financially the abuse of people all over the globe. This prohibition is really expensive. Just as prohibition against alcohol created the mafia, this prohibition against marijuana and cocaine and these barbiturates has created multiple layers of mafia-type enterprises around the world, really just to feed the beast of American addiction and use in recreational drugs. And it's irresponsible what we're doing. And at some point, hopefully, if we can wrestle back our democracy from the corporatocracy that exists, I think that we should do far better in terms of how we regulate narcotics and how we dismantle the financial incentives that make the world just less safe. It makes agricultural land less safe. It makes poor people more exploited. It leaves women being raped and exploited. We've got this war on drugs is so deep, and it's expensive.
Children being kidnapped and burned.
Children being kidnapped and burned.
Insane.
And I mean, and those are the ones that you've heard about,
right.
Like you're not hearing about whole villages being burned out of land that's going to be clear cut for the growth of poppies or coca leaves in other South American countries. Where, when I was in Peru last summer, there was a big showdown with the drug cartels and the national police in Peru, because the cartels are pushing into Peru, which had previously not been a hotbed, but it has wonderful grow conditions. And so now they're pushing into the jungles of Peru. They're clear cutting. They're moving people. The manufacture of methamphetamine in some of these smaller villages, it's just poisoning the water and killing the fish. So not only are you making it unsafe and you're doing this whole thing, right, with guns and cartels, safe passage, you're now also poisoning the environment, right, where this does not have to be this way. And this is all under the ruse of trying to protect Americans from consuming the drugs that they're consuming in record numbers that's driving the demand. Now these people...
Record and increasing numbers, yeah.
Increasing numbers. And so there's so much misery spread domestically and abroad around this failed policy of a war on drugs, which has us spraying agricultural crops with this pesticide that's meant to kill coca plants, right, and marijuana plants. So we go spray wholesale the farms of people who are not farming drugs.
Right.
So we're killing yucca plants and the sweet peas and the sweet potatoes at this, because under the
corn
ruse,
and more, yeah.
right, under this ruse of stopping the drugs from coming into American society, and we're starving people. You're not hearing that in the media either, right?
Right.
So there's, and we're subsidizing it while we're not fully funding our schools in the United States, and we can't guarantee education to every child that doesn't need to be left behind.
Oh, Lynette, we're gonna have to have you back on because we can talk about that.
Since we don't have any money for that, but we can pay for military planes to go spray and kill the crops of poor farmers.
We can shoot billions of dollars
right
into
in
space.
Colombia. So
we can get there too.
So
Yeah.
you know, so I have some serious issues about that, and I celebrate again. Prop 47 is one teeny tiny baby step in the right direction of saying, let's be sane and sober and truly committed to making sure that the scales of justice are balanced, right? The scripture says, I'm a Christian, scripture says the Lord deplores unjust scales. So it is ungodly, ungodly to put somebody in prison, to allow somebody who is holding an ounce of cocaine in prison for multiple years and let out a rapist in 10 and call it justice, right? It is unjust when a parent who will go to prison, what it was the mother who left her child in the car, just forgot, like lived through this tragedy, leaving my baby in the car, could have been dropped off at daycare. I'm facing 10 or 15 years in prison, right, while I grieve, and an officer can kill somebody in cold blood, as was the case in the Oscar Grant case, and out in 2 years. So those are unjust scales. Anybody who sits back and says, let me not just look at the individuals, let me not look at the names or the faces, let me just look at the facts. And how do you say that this system is just? No, this is an unjust system, and me and God, we deplore unjust scales.
So let's talk about, and as we wrap up and come to a close, and there is so much work to do from all of us, because it's not just our elected officials who bear this burden. 2 years left. What are your priorities for the next 2 years?
They remain the same priorities, right? When I asked people to vote for me, I told them I would not promise them a fix. I would promise them things would get better, right? Like we could work together on better. And I believe we're working in the right direction. Since being elected, I've worked on jobs policy and public safety. What was it? Economic and workforce development issues. I said I wanted an economy in Oakland that worked for all. We wanted public safety that was a better performance, right? That I wanted a department that was transparent and accountable and treating citizens with respect, and I wanted a department that was very successful at arresting people who needed to be arrested. Not everybody's operating in their good sense.
Right.
They need to be taken to jail. And I wanted a department that was fully equipped to take some folk to jail and to make their arrest stick.
Right.
So happy to report reductions in crime as measured by our crime stats. Homicides and robberies are down. No officer-involved shooting in Oakland in 20 months. I've been here 24.
Wonderful.
So I like to say that our attention around that. We have an increased number of officers of color and people who speak other languages. We have improved our relations with transgender community, which is a very vulnerable community here in Oakland, between the police and the transgender community, especially after the brutal murder of Brandy Martell in the downtown in 2012. We are removing some of the red tape and barriers. Hopefully we will have housing being built in Oakland for the first time 8 years, get some housing starts and restore our construction economy, both rental and for sale housing. And we're working very diligently to keep the sports teams in place without breaking our bank.
Raiders.
We are, and those A's,
Yeah.
and the Warriors.
And the
I have not
yeah.
given up on the Warriors, although they seem to say they're in love with San Francisco.
It's not done until it's done.
I would say, they came from there, and so in some ways they might say we stole them first, but whatever. I'm trying to keep them here.
Right.
Whatever.
Yeah.
Your championships were won on this side, but just saying.
Right.
We have increased the amount of attention that we're able to give our parks and open spaces, more attention to our medians. We've increased illegal dumping. We've restored pay to our city employees and city workers, hopefully making them competitive so that we can continue to attract talent when we need to hire. But, negotiated, I think, a fair contract, got rid of furlough days so people can have a full service city 7 days a week, which wasn't happening, 2 years ago. And that work is not done. So I'm not one to say, woo, let's shift gears. I think we still need to do better. The department is diversifying these academies. We need to sustain the growth in that direction. Our street outreach teams are working on crime intervention. We need to do more, and especially in terms of offering services to those who are seeking a change from a life of violence. We need to do more. And this is not just Oakland, but Oakland's advocacy at the state and federal levels. We need to do more to have job-producing industries in our cities. So we can do all that we can on a local level to attract advanced manufacturing. The president talked about that a great deal in his first State of the Union after re-election. We are working locally to try to manifest that here to make it possible. But until we restore an economy that produces a working class, I think we're going to continue to buckle under these pressures of the shadow economy because it's the only place where people can get hired.
Last question, Lynette. Where do you see yourself 10 or 15 years from now? Is there a Congresswoman McElhaney in your future? Can we look forward to that?
I don't look that far. The only thing I can see 10 years from now, if the Lord say the same, is seeing my sons married and growing the number of grandchildren I have. Like, the personal relationships are what I can see that far out. In terms of how God would have me serve, I really don't know. And I feel like my focus is so on being faithful over what I'm entrusted with right here. Right? Like, I just want to be faithful over the charge that the voters have given me today. Am I faithfully and effectively executing the work of advocating for the residents and businesses in District 3? Am I being a voice and a champion for justice on citywide issues, of challenging all of us to think about what do we do to make sure that Oakland is respected in the region, that we're doing our part regionally to set a standard for everyone's quality of life, right? Are we speaking up for justice and mercy? I think as this government should, to look out for those, wealthy people don't need government, right? They can buy protection, they can buy private police. It is the poor and the working class that need government. And is government delivering on that promise? The promise of the democracy is really this promise of the middle class, and that you reduce the suffering for poor people. And we want to reduce the ranks of the poor, grow the middle class, and make sure that we serve our higher and more affluent communities who can otherwise buy themselves protection and access.
So the answer to my question is me. Thank you, Lynette.
I don't know about maybe. No. I just say that,
it's possible.
Well, it's so hard for me to even think that it's possible. I mean, it was so impossible that I would be in this seat.
Right.
So when you start talking about that stuff, I'm like, ooh, child, no. But I am so honored to be in a position to serve. To serve the citizens of Oakland, to serve African Americans, because I believe as a Black elected, you represent a people and issues related to these people. To be born in this skin and to be a child of Southern migrants, and to understand, in my body, in my psyche, what that means, and the legacy of of slavery and recovery from slavery. Like, we're still in recovery. We haven't got to post-recovery yet. I'm so honored to be here and to prayerfully, lovingly bring my story forward in a way that it makes a difference in someone's life.
Beautiful. Appreciate the realness. Thank you, Lynette.
Thank you, Chamia. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Always.
Thank you.